Right. Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for joining us today for this 24th talk in our series being organized by the Teachers Against the Climate Change, or TACC. So the TACC was formed in September 2019 and primarily comprises college and university teachers from all over India and some abroad. We don't have very many school teachers as yet, though we hope to and intend to. And largely there are teachers from large towns. I also hope we do manage to spread into smaller towns as well. I should add that we are both non-funded and we are also a non-party organization, and the primary purpose is to sort of take the issue of different facets of the climate crisis, link to various other issues and movements, and take that out to students primarily, to activists, and of course to teachers everywhere. So also so one of the things we've done consistently, of course, is to hold these series of talks, of which, as I said, today is the 24th, and I'd like to thank Professor Martinez-Alier for agreeing to speak with us today. We also have a few subgroups. As Rajesh mentioned, we have a subgroup to do with Delhi emissions. We have a subgroup to do with environmental justice. There's one around curricula. Having said that, I must say that our work was sort of quite adversely affected by the second wave of COVID. And in a sense, we are sort of still recovering from, like a lot of organizations, our work was affected by the second wave. And we are still sort of emerging from that and so on, and sort of surfacing and trying to regroup as our work together. I also must add two things briefly before I pass it on to Rajeshwari. One is, of course, that today, there's this massive farmers movement sort of regrouping in Muzaffarnagar, huge rallies taking place there today against the farm laws. And I would like to once again, like the last time, extend our solidarity from the teachers group to the farmers movement. And secondly, I'd also say that this is our first meeting after the 6th assessment report of the IPCC came out, was released on 9th August of 2009. And it has sort of emphasized and underlined very emphatically the various ways in which the Earth system, including India, is being affected by different ways by the climate crisis. With those few words, I'd like to pass it on to Professor Rajeshwari Raina, who will conduct and chair this meeting. Thank you, Rajeshwari, and over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Nagaraj, and a very warm welcome to you, Professor Martinez-Alier. We're extremely grateful as a group, the TACC, that you've accepted our invitation and you will speak to us today. Very, very quickly, I just want to tell the audience something that Professor Martinez-Alier said in last lecture that we organized from Shiv Nadar University for our students again. I mean, in a course that I teach, and there were lots of students in this hall, and he said it's not just important to do country, like the IPCC report that Nagaraj mentioned. It's not just important to do country-wise comparisons, across regions and so on, but also do a cross-cultural analysis, on questions of copper mining, on sand mining, on plantations, on oil palm plantations, what's happening in the Northeast today, right? Dams, and so coal-fired power plants. And so he said, what is it that we can do as cross-cultural comparisons, and also ask how many of these movements that are coming up against these, so like women environmental defenders, who get killed, right? So the role that some groups play in, again, environmental conflicts in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia, right, in our context. So what I'm trying to tell our students in particular who are here is that this is a lecture that is going to take us through several of these questions, and it comes from somebody, from Professor Martinez-Alier. My introduction to him as an intellectual whose life and work personify the perfect fusion of academic and activist concerns is something that the TACC hopes to live up to, and we all want to get there, to combine the two in as meaningful a fashion as possible for our sustainability and our well-being on Earth, ours and the Earth's. So his work as an economist is Well, he was one of the founder members of the International Society for Ecological Economics, the Environmental Justice Movement, Environmental Justice Organizations, Liabilities and Trade, EJOLT as it's called. Any of you who were interested, you can download this. I mean, you can just Google it and get into this EJOLT page, and it's an interactive page. Among his books, I mean, what many of us have read and grown up on, the book on ecological economics, energy, environment, and society, pitching this debate that Podolinsky had on theories of energy-based valuation of work and value, yeah, varieties of environmentalism, co-authored with Ramchandra Guha, which is very popular in this country, environmentalism of the poor, yeah, a study of ecological conflicts and valuation. These three books are central to many major debates in this country, and ecological economics as a discipline, and also ecological economics and its contribution to decision-making stems to a great extent from Professor Martinez-Alier's work. So I'm going to stop here and say a very, very warm welcome to you again, Professor Martinez-Alier, and we look forward to hearing you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will start going through the slides I want to show to you. And what has been said is what I want to talk about movements against fossil fuels, which might have an effect on the situation now, which is an excessive amount of emissions of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And this is measured by this famous graph, which is called the Killing curve, because Killing was a scientist who was sent by the Scripps Institution from San Diego, California, to set up this observatory in Mauna Loa in Hawaii, where there has been a continuous measurement of the carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere, which you can also do this in Delhi or anywhere in the world. But Mauna Loa is supposed to be a quiet place without car traffic or much traffic of any kind, because it's a high mountain. And what we know is that in the world in general, because it's the same amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere all around the world, is that it has gone up from, as it says here, from about 300 parts per million before in the in the 1950s. Before that, this was already known that this might happen by somebody called Arrhenius, did those calculations at the end of the 19th century. It has gone up to more than 400 parts per million. In fact, today must be something like 415 or 12 or something parts per million, and going up steadily, as you see, towards 450 parts per million before 2050, and 500 parts per million before the end of the century. Some of you who are listening here and who are younger than I am, if you're going to live 30 or 40 or 50 years longer, as I hope you will, so you are going to see this. You are going to see the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere going up to 450 parts per million and even beyond this. Then people say this is going to mean an increase in temperature of 2 degrees, 3 degrees, it depends. In the Arctic will be 4 or 5 degrees. So I don't like to talk about the degrees of increase in temperature. I prefer much more to talk about the Killing curve, because it is something that we know very well. And it's something that I myself think that I should have been taught this even 40 years ago or 50 years ago when I was a student, and or 55 years ago when I was a university student, and I was not. because I was being trained as an economist, and economists don't talk about this, and even because it was not taught in general in secondary school or in university. But it was known, it was very well known by ecologists and by climate scientists. And this is why this measurement was organized and has become so famous. If the whole world had the per capita emissions of India, there would be no enhanced, not increased greenhouse effect. It would be the normal one, the one that has existed without humans, which is a good greenhouse effect. What has happened is that we have increased the concentration of carbon dioxide emissions. The concentration not only have increased the emissions, by the concentration in the atmosphere of carbon dioxide, CO2, and also methane and other greenhouse gases. The human-produced emissions of carbon dioxide are about, as I wrote here, 40 billion American billion tons, or is the same thing to call it gigatons, meaning 1,000 million. So let's remember this figure, 40 gigatons is easy. I'm sorry, it's in Greek, it's not my language either, giga, but it's how we know. If you are more used to the American billions, it's the same thing, 1,000 million, 40,000 million tons, or in almost means 5 tons per capita, because in the world we are about 7.5 billion people. So 5 tons per capita. In India, it's not 5 tons per capita, it's only 2 tons per capita. So if the Indian government goes to the COP meeting, the climate change international meetings, as the next one in Glasgow, now in November, they always claim with reason that India has no big responsibility in India as a country on the increase in the greenhouse effect. And this is true, historically and even today. I'll come back to this question of responsibility. What we know is that this, the concentration should go down. The killing curve should be flattened and then go down if possible. And this can only be achieved by decreasing the emissions. Already in 1991, the first good analysis about all this question of inequality and environmental injustices came out from Delhi in a pamphlet from the Center for Science and Environment, written by Anil Agarwal and Sunita Narayan, in which they wrote a pamphlet with the title Global Warming, a Case of Environmental Colonialism. And it is a very useful, very not popular, but very famous pamphlet, because they said, we, the poor people of the earth, writing from Delhi, we are not responsible for the increase in the greenhouse effect. It's only historically the rich countries, the industrial countries that have been burning a lot of coal, mineral coal, which was dug in the earth, photosynthesis from the remote past, millions of years ago. They have been, or we are taking it out and we are burning it in machines, in coal-fired power plants now, or in the steam engines of the Industrial Revolution. And not only coal, also a lot of oil, which is also photosynthesis of the past, and also gas, natural gas, which is the same. I hope you understand this idea of photosynthesis of the past, because the biomass, the sugarcane, the rice, the palm oil, all the plants that we are growing now in the world, they are taking carbon dioxide and they're growing with this. When they die, the plants, the carbon dioxide goes to the atmosphere. So they take carbon dioxide and they produce carbon dioxide at night, or they produce carbon dioxide when they die. So there is an equilibrium here. But what we do with photosynthesis of the past is to use the plants, the fossil fuels from the remote past, which are in fact plants and animals which have been fossilized. And we take it in the form of coal, gas, and oil, and we burn it after the Industrial Revolution, and now more and more in our cars or planes or any kind of machines using fossil fuels. So this is some of the points I wanted to make. India is increasing the emissions, of course, because there is a transition to coal in India, not away from coal. Still, you're burning more and more coal, oil and gas, and also biomass, and also solar energy, and also photovoltaic energy, but also wind energy. You are burning or using more of anything, as all countries have done when they grow economically. And also the point that Agarwal and Narayan were making in 1991, which is what, 30 years ago, with this idea that there was an inequality in the emissions, and therefore there was an ecological debt from the rich countries to the south, or from the rich people to the poor people. And the rich countries have always refused to acknowledge this environmental liability. The Paris Agreement, if you are familiar with this, of the year 2015 on climate change, the Paris Agreement explicitly says that no environmental liability is acknowledged. If not, the rich countries would not have signed the Paris Agreement, which promises some reductions, but only are promises, not real realities yet. So my talk is going to be, I think a paper has been distributed about these 4 questions, which some of them are going to touch very, very quickly. One is the circularity gap of the metabolic gap, or metabolic rift, if you wish. The degree of circularity of the industrial economy is very low. The amount of materials, including the energy carriers, which I mean again, coal, gas, oil, and also biomass, where, for instance, ethanol from sugarcane, or biodiesel, which is used as energy, or in fact in India, dung or wood used for energy. All this energy or non-energy material like metals, or what else could be other materials, for instance, a lot of sand and gravel for the cement energy, all kinds of materials entering the world economy is at this moment more or less 100 gigatons, which is a very easy number to remember. It's going up every year. Went up last year because of the pandemics, and now it's going up again. 100 gigatons, which is, well, this is about 7 tons per capita, isn't it? No, it's not 7, it's about 13 tons per capita, 13 tons per capita in the world. Of these 100 gigatons, only 10 or less, 8, are recycled. So it means that since the recycling input is so low, there are like 92 gigatons, 92,000 million tons that every year the world economy has to fetch from the commodity frontiers, from anywhere, could be sand and gravel from the rivers of India or the beaches, could be oil from imported oil, or could be gas, imported oil, imported also, or could be a lot of coal from Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand, or also imported for the Indian economy. But also, as I said before, wood and all kinds of materials. This is why this notion of commodity extraction frontiers is very important for this type of analysis. For instance, I have an article about to be published in a few weeks in Ecological Economics on the Arctic extraction frontiers. The Arctic is becoming, because also of the melting of the ice, a big place for new commodity extraction frontiers, including coal and anthracite for India, from the Yamal Peninsula in Russia, is going to be exported to India, like 20 million tons per year, perhaps. So there are lots of conflicts on extraction, and also growing conflicts on where to put the excessive amount of waste, including the waste carbon dioxide. And therefore, complaints arise, including what we now are calling LFFU movements. This means living fossil fuels underground. And these are new conflicts about which I'm going to talk in a minute. And they are part of the world movement for environmental justice. And I want to present here, which is quite a novelty, a sort of rough estimate of the amount of carbon dioxide avoided by these movements, which are keeping coal, gas, oil underground. Well, this is the cover of a book that we published already in 2013. And as you see, the cover comes from a girl in Colombia, who is the daughter of a very famous activist in Colombia. And she draws very interesting drawings. And she made this drawing for a meeting in South Africa of the All Watch network. And so the tree must be a baobab because it's Africa. But what I want is to point out to the slogan. I did not invent this slogan. This slogan was invented already in the mid-1990s. Keep oil in the soil, keep coal in the hole. Keep oil in the soil was invented in Nigeria, in the Niger Delta, by somebody I suppose called Nemo Basse, because he's an activist against the oil industry in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, which has done a lot of damage with companies like Shell from the Netherlands and Chevron from the US and so on. So keep oil in the soil, keep coal in the hole is what we now call LFFU movements, leave fossil fuels underground. This is the cover of a book which you can get in the web. So there are top-down policies which I don't want to dismiss, like quotas, emission quotas per country, carbon taxes, what other things there are, I don't know, persuasion to countries or to consumers, isn't it? Not to travel so much by plane and use more the internet for their meetings instead of traveling and so on. All these are top-down policies which I am totally in favor of. But there are also these bottom-up grassroots movements. For instance, in Ecuador, between 2007 and 2017, there was a government initiative called the Yasune ITT initiative to keep oil under the ground in the Amazon of the country of Ecuador. This was a mixture of bottom-up because the idea came from environmental organizations from 10 years before, and the government for a while in Ecuador, including the president, favored this. But in 2017, a bit earlier, 13, the government already decided to take the oil out from these Yasune fields in Amazonia of Ecuador. And I myself in 2000, with Rea Tempa, we published an article in the Economic and Political Weekly, which is a very good journal being published in India. I can't remember, every week or every 2 weeks or every month. I think it's every 2 weeks. And it's a very good journal in which we publish this short article talking about this, about the Yasune initiative, oil and climate change, voices from the South. You can find it very easily. So I'm going to focus on these bottom-up movements and initiatives. For instance, very recently, a Goldman Prize, which is given to activists, to environmental activists, mostly from the South, was awarded to Kimiko Hirata, a woman from Japan, in the Kiko network in Japan. And this network has been contributing lately to stopping coal-fired power plants in Japan. Because after the Fukushima accident, the nuclear accident in 2011, there was for a short while a sort of coal renaissance, a movement to have more energy from coal and less from nuclear power plants, because many nuclear power plants were closed down. Not only Fukushima that closed itself, so to speak, after the tsunami and the accident and so on. People around nuclear power plants were very frightened, and they managed to close down many nuclear power plants. There are many in Japan. So for a while, the government said, well, let's finance some coal-fired power plants. This network and many local people, the Kiko network, complain about it. I'm going to show a couple of pictures about this. And very recently, 1 week ago, a movement in Canada and Brazil, an indigenous resistance movement, said that they had managed to stop about 20 fossil fuel projects in the US and Canada, mostly pipelines. And this is more or less, they said, the equivalent to at least 25% of annual US and Canadian emissions. Well, I think 25 is a little bit exaggerated, but it's true, as I'm going to show later, that if you count the Keystone, the Keystone pipeline and the Dakota pipeline and some pipelines in Canada also stopped, it's true that they're making a contribution to decrease the burning of gas and oil in the US, and this is, well, useful for the world in general. What we should do of the 40 gigatons, which I mentioned at the beginning, I think this is being recorded, and you can go later again listening to all these numbers, because I know it's difficult to memorize all of them. But there is this big number, 40 billion or 40 gigatons of excessive carbon dioxide that humans, rich and poor, but mostly the rich, of course, are putting of excessive carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And we have to go down very, very soon to 20 gigatons or less, half. And we can do this by public policies, carbon taxes, changes in technology, I think economic degrowth in the rich country, also stop or decrease to human population, and also, as one of the factors, these bottom-up movements of leave fossil fuels underground. In India, in the last few months, there was something which was politically interesting, but also environmentally and socially interesting, because some girls, including, what's her name, Disha Ravi, was put in jail. Not many girls were put in jail. She was put in jail because of the famous toolkit that she was. So all these kind of partly ridiculous and partly politically interesting events took place. Well, interesting is like a euphemism, isn't it? I am sure she didn't find it very interesting, very instructive, let's call it. Very instructive happenings took place. But what I want to show is secondhand from this blog or periodical called The News Minute. They showed that a few weeks before all these things happened, these persons were in Bangalore, I suppose, demonstrating, and the central figure in the picture has a cardboard slogan saying, "Fund farmers, not coal." Farmers she meant Punjab farmers, because they were already demonstrating, isn't it? So this is quite subversive, I agree, or seditious even, in a funny way, because it means give money to the farmers and not give money to the coal industry, the coal electricity industry in India, isn't it? Well, I don't know whether they get money as such, but they get blocks of coal in Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand and so on to produce more coal that goes to the electricity industry. So, well, slogans have to be short, and you cannot go into a lot of discussions about this, but as a policy, this would be the policy: fund farmers and not coal. So this exists in India. I wouldn't think this is very popular, that politically, I don't think that many political parties are preaching this, but it's an interesting thing. And this demonstration was, or these women who are in the picture, or men also, I think one, think that they are together with the Fridays for Future movement around the world. I am not going to talk a lot about India because I think it's a bit impertinent. Somebody from Barcelona trying to lecture people in India what they should do. But I have learned a lot of the things I know from India. So I mention India just a little bit later on. But here I am going to mention rather other places in the south of the planet. This picture from all the pictures I show are taken from the Atlas of Environmental Justice. And of course, they are secondhand. They are taken from either academic literature like this one, or from blogs, from demonstrators, from newspapers, from blogs, and so on. This is in South Cotabato, which is in the Philippines, neither in the north nor in the real south. In South Cotabato, and it's a demonstration a couple of years ago of people against coal mining, not a coal-fired power plant, but against coal mining. And the next one is also in the Philippines, also in the north, and this is a picture of Gloria Capitan, who was killed, an activist in 2016, because she was demonstrating too much for the taste of some people who were pro-coal, against, in a place called Mariveles, not far from Manila, against coal deposits, coal stockpiling, and coal-fired power plants. It's interesting that the inferior part of the picture says Katarungan, which means justice in Tagalog, and also, as you see, it says coal kills. Well, it was too true. Coal kills locally, and coal in a way kills globally, isn't it? Because of the carbon dioxide, or too much coal kills globally because of the excessive carbon dioxide and the greenhouse effect. And Gloria Capitan belonged in the Philippines to a movement for climate justice. And this movement now, she rememorates her as a martyr. The 1st of July 2016, she was killed. She was already a grandmother, and she was killed in a little shop she had. And these things happen, well, in the Philippines happen a lot compared to other places in the world, but happen in many other places also. The next one is more peaceful because it's in Japan. Nobody got killed, fortunately. And these are people demonstrating near Japan in this Yokosuka power plant that they were going to make. I think they stopped it. And the other one, I think one that has been made and has been put into functioning in the Soga coal power in Chiba prefecture. So I leave you just 1 minute to read this, if not in Japanese. There are also some of the banners are in English. In the upper one, it says Japanese government stop increasing coal-fired power plants. This is the movement, the Kiko movement or network that got a Goldman Prize recently through Kimiko Hirata. And these people, as you see, are more middle class than the ones I saw in the Philippines in South Cotabato, which were really, well, I don't know how you would call them. They are popular people, subaltern people, if you want to use this kind of terminology. They are the people, isn't it? A little bit of everything, men, women, children. These, I think, are more middle class for the look they have, and probably some scientists, some professionals, perhaps some lawyers, but people who are complaining against coal-fired power plants because they pollute, as they do in Delhi and Kanpur, for instance, and in the north of India in winter. Is very polluting industry with particles and sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide. So coal-fired power plants are very polluting industries locally, but also they pollute, it's not pollution, but they contaminate the air, the atmosphere all around the world, and they cause the increased greenhouse effect. So in the Soga case, this movement, Kiko, has stopped about 8 or 10 coal-fired power plants. And they say this is like 40 million tons of carbon dioxide. Yeah, this is true. In this case of the Soga coal-fired power plant, it would have like 1,000 megawatts power, and this more or less is 6 or 7 million tons of carbon dioxide. So if you are into memorizing figures, or if you listen to this later on again, is a very good number. 1,000 megawatts, equivalent to 6 or 7 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. A little, yeah, I am not going to talk in lakh and crore because I'm going to get confused myself, but you can memorize this. 1,000 megawatts working for about how many years, how many hours per year? Well, probably 7,000 hours or something like this. You know, 1 year has 365 days, and this work not 24 hours, but perhaps 20 hours per day on average every year. So this means 6 or 7 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. So I already explained that they are worried for local reasons and for global reasons. One power station is not very much compared to the emissions from Japan, but everything helps. This is from India. One of the many instances of India about which I could talk about would be about coal mining in Chhattisgarh, in Jharkhand, and in West Bengal, in Odisha also, in this central part of India, which is the South America of India in a way, where extractivism triumphs for the rest of India, not only with coal, also bauxite and everything, all the minerals, for the rest of India, isn't it? Also paper pulp, eucalyptus, everything. So, but this is from the south. This is from Karnataka, near Mysore. And there was a plan for 3 big coal-fired power plants of 1,000 megawatts India, for 1,000 megawatts each. In these places, Gulbarga, Belgaum, and Chamalapura. The one in Chamalapura was stopped. You can see the details if you go to the Atlas of Environmental Justice, where there is a very good explanation by somebody else, not myself, about what happened. About some years after the event, this grandfather, who was one of the leaders of the protest, with probably a granddaughter, was unveiling this stone, and the newspaper said, the citizen said, a victory cast in stone. I cannot read Kannada. I will never in my life read Kannada, I think, unfortunately. But if some of you do, you can see what the stone says. Well, these things are very interesting. I mean, for historians in the future and for environmental history and for ecological activism and for social history and for economic history, isn't it? One could ask, in this case, was there what technically, I don't know whether we can talk a lot of technical things here, technically we call leakage, which means that you stop a power plant here, another one is built somewhere else, which I shall talk about this later. Technically, this is called leakage. For instance, I don't spend carbon dioxide traveling to Delhi to give this lecture, which would be a very eccentric thing to do. But if I don't spend the carbon dioxide, somebody else will do it. Well, I don't know. Perhaps nobody else will do it. So this is what we call leakage. Now, some South African cases. Sometimes in these complaints against coal, oil, and gas, the local opposition is the main thing, as in Chamalapura, clearly. They were worried about coal mining and a coal power plant being built there, the local pollution, spoiling the agricultural landscape and the food production and so on, near Mysore. If we look at a movement in Germany called Ende Gelände against coal mining in Germany, near Berlin actually, and near Köln, in both sides of Germany, east and west, this movement is mainly worried about the incongruity of the German government talking so much about climate change and ecology and not stopping lignite coal mining inside Germany. And I think they're going to win. They're going to win, and lignite mining is going to be stopped soon in Germany because of climate change. If we look to other places in the world, it's not like this. In South Africa, we are going to see something about South Africa. This is Fikile, or was Fikile Ntshangase, who was killed in November last year as an activist also. An activist in KwaZulu-Natal, in Somkhele, near this mine called Tendele, with a mining company called Petmin. She was killed because she was complaining as a leader of a local group against the expansion. She was just at the commodity extraction frontier of a coal mine. A coal mine, not so much for burning coal immediately as for coal for steel making. So you know that when steel is made, quite often it uses a lot of coal for burning to make the steel. So the steel is just iron ore, and combined with the coal, which is burning furiously, I mean, a very high temperature, all this becomes steel in blast furnaces. So this is what happens, I think, is 2 tons of coal for each ton of steel. So this is good coal. It's not lignite, it's anthracite. And this would be exported from South Africa, probably. If you look at the picture below, this part here, you will see this slogan in a demonstration a few days before, the slogan as a few days after the killing of Fikile. And these people demonstrating, they are complaining, of course. They are saying coal kills again. And they are saying keep coal in the hole. So they are using this slogan, which, as I said, was invented about 20 or 25 years ago. Keep oil in the hole, keep coal in the hole. I know these things are sad, but these are real. All these things happened just a few months ago, less than 1 year ago. The next one is nobody has been killed, and it's easier, and also I think have stopped it, is in Jamaica, where there's a lot of bauxite mining. And bauxite, like in Odisha in India, bauxite needs electricity to become alumina and then aluminium, a lot of electricity. So they were going to build a coal-fired power plant, which would again produce about 6.7 million tons of carbon dioxide per year, because it would be like 1,000 megawatts coal-fired power plant, and a Chinese company was going to do this. And what has happened at the end, to put it briefly, is that because of the local complaints, because of the bauxite mining, the pollution and everything, this probably has been built or is going to be built not with coal, but with gas. So we limit about half the amount of carbon dioxide because gas power plants are more efficient than coal power plants. This called combined cycle gas power plants. But anyway, a lot of carbon dioxide is going to be produced by building the aluminium, which will produce with the bauxite. Notice that aluminium, a part of it is recycled every year. Tins of aluminium are recycled, but a lot is not recycled. A lot, like 80% or 70% is not recycled. It's fresh aluminium coming from bauxite, converted into aluminium with a lot of electricity. And if the economy grows, then of course, even less is recycled because a lot of fresh bauxite, fresh between commas, comes into the economy with a lot of electricity. This is what Vedanta wanted to do in Lanjigar, well, has done in Lanjigar, where there is a refinery, but wanted to do in Odisha in the Niyamgiri hill, isn't it? And has been stopped for the time being. This now I change from coal to oil and gas very briefly. And I show first a couple of cases from Latin America against fracking, gas fracking. One in Mexico, in Coahuila, the state of Coahuila, blocking the Alianza Mexicana contra el Fracking. Alianza Mexicana contra el Fracking is very clear what it means, isn't it? Mexican Alliance against fracking. And what do? They block a highway and other things. Hopefully they are all peaceful and civic resistance. That's what you call in India with like words like Jirao and hotels and Hartal and so on. All the names in India for movements of civic resistance about many things, including environmental issues, isn't it? And here it says, fuera, meaning get rid of Chevron in Neuquén, which is a province in Argentina, not to fracking. And some Mapuche indigenous people demonstrating with Mapuche banners, flags. This is not the Argentinian flag at all. This is an Indian, an indigenous flag common to all of South America. The next one is very far from Argentina in the Lofoten Island. And this is about not gas, but oil. The Lofoten Island is very beautiful, and there are many birds and many animals and many whales, and also a lot of cod fish. And so people go there to fish the cod in some parts of some season of the year. And there is also a lot of oil by chance, which they have discovered. So Norway is a very, from an environmental point of view, one could say is a rather nasty country because they found a lot of oil and they are taking the oil out to sell it and to make money with it. And of course, this oil gets burned and produces carbon dioxide. So oil cannot claim to be a very green country, isn't it? It's not very populated, and there are lots of nice landscapes and so on. So it's not internally, Norway is rather green, but externally, the money they are making selling the oil that goes into a fund for the future generations of Norwegians quite a lot this is not very ecological. But in this case, because of local protests in Norway, inside Norway, by Friends of the Earth, and outside Norway a little bit, and because of the hypocrisy, isn't it, of saying we are very ecological, but we're going to destroy this fishery, they have changed and they have decided recently to leave the oil under the ground, under the sea, and not to take it. This is like 175 million tons of oil that we could count, multiplying by 3 in units of carbon dioxide avoided, isn't it? Politically, what happened is that the Labour Party, which is one in the coalition, I think, changed lines. And the Labour Party, which is normal, a socialist party, was backing the trade unions, isn't it? Backing the oil trade unions for a very long time, for all its life as a Labour Party. Well, not the life, but probably was founded in the 19th century. And oil comes in the right 40 or 50 years, has changed and has become green, perhaps because of political competence of other parties. So this is a European, one of the very few European examples of leaving oil in the soil and coal in the hole and gas under the grass, if you want. Also happened in the Netherlands, in Groningen recently, in which gas was decided in the Netherlands not to take it out because of local protests and climate change issues. This is in the US. This is the demonstrators in the Dakota pipeline, isn't it? Dakota pipeline, which would be, as I explained here, a very large pipeline that would bring oil from the north, meaning from Canada, actually, from Alberta at the beginning to North Dakota, and then to Illinois, and then to the Gulf of Mexico. And this, as you see, is 25 million tons of oil. This, because 500,000 barrels of oil represent exactly, or more or less exactly, 25 million tons of oil per year. When burned would be 25 million tons of CO2. They won. This has been stopped. As other has been stopped, the Keystone, the XL Keystone pipeline, because Biden decided to stop it. When what's his name, Trump was in favor of having it going. So I leave the US and Canada aside, although it would be very interesting to talk more about it. At the beginning I showed this, that indigenous groups are saying, we are managing to stop 25 of the emissions of Canada and the United States, isn't it? The indigenous people are the ones that have been managing with blockade action to stop some of these pipelines, also in Canada. The Kinder Morgan pipeline going from Alberta to Vancouver and then for export to China. I want to show just these anecdotal cases in southern Italy. In southern Italy is one place where gas pipeline coming from the east, from Russia, and going through, or from Central Asia rather than Russia, from Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all these countries which now people are learning more about them because also of Afghanistan and so on. And if you are listening to this in northern India, you are not too far of these places. Anyway, the gas, which India will perhaps get from Iran someday, or is already getting from Iran, to Europe, comes either from northern Africa, Algeria, Libya, through some pipelines under the sea. We are getting this. We don't allow people to migrate to Europe. We are very pleased getting the gas at a cheap price. Anyway, I am almost finished. In India, it goes through Puglia, south. And there is this movement, which I like very much, which in Italian, they say, né qui, né altrove, which exactly means not here, not anywhere else, not niabi, as they would say in the States, not in anyone's backyard, not in our backyard, and not in anyone's backyard. Because from the beginning of the environmental movement, many of the local movements have been sort of dismissed in the US or in Britain by saying in English, NIMBY, not in my backyard. You are only worried about your own backyard. And they say, no, not our backyard. Well, of course they are not. Only if this comes from Anatolia, it's not our backyard. And then I will show two really impressive cases. One is in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, very contemporary, because a few months ago, they started like a local, really military fight between some local groups, which are Islamic, because they are Islamic from, I don't know, from 1,000 years ago. The eastern coast of Africa, there are many Islamic people. And then the Portuguese came more recently, 500 years ago, and there are also Christian groups, and there are colonial, well, you know the history. You know the history because Vasco da Gama, in fact, came from Eastern Africa to Kerala about 500 and some years ago. So Mozambique is down the coast, eastern coast of Africa, and the company called Total is trying to get 550 million tons of LNG, means liquid natural gas. So you take the gas, you liquefy it, very low temperature with a lot of energy, and then you can export it as liquid to China or to Europe and so on. And there is a lot of opposition, and there is going, I think, to be a war, a local war in northern Mozambique, in Cabo Delgado, between some informal troops from the Total company and the local people who are complaining, not so much about displacement, but also about displacement, but about whether they are going to see any part of this money, because it's a lot of money. As you see, the investment is $20 billion. And anyway, if you are interested in this kind of conflicts, you could follow Cabo Delgado, because I wouldn't be surprised if some of this gas at the end comes to India, but it could go to China, most of it, or to Europe. Total is the company Total. It was an Anadarko before, which is American thing, but the present company involved is Total from France. And the next one is from the other side of Africa, from Namibia and Botswana, where they say, the company has said, they had found between 12 billion barrels or 10 times as much, 1 lakh barrels of oil, which is a lot. Between Namibia and Botswana, there is a river going down here, and there is an internal delta, doesn't go to the sea. And because of the water, there is a very biologically rich area with big animals, elephants and so on, but also small animals and vegetation. And it's there that the oil is there. And I don't know what will happen, but it's something that you could follow in the future. So conclusions. Complementing top-down public policies to reduce carbon dioxide, that could be these bottom-up, not policies, actions by local groups, local NGOs, local alliances to leave fossil fuels on the ground. I say it again, the industrial economy is not circular, it is entropic. And because of this, there is the search for new materials everywhere, from the commodity extraction frontiers. And it's true that all this that goes into the economy, all the fossil fuels are burned and then produce excessive amounts of carbon dioxide. All the coal, gas, and oil burned today is not available tomorrow. This is called the second law of thermodynamics, but we don't need any physics. We know in practice that this is what happens, isn't it? So, and we could more or less propose a kind of estimate of the carbon dioxide emissions avoided by this kind of movements. For instance, I know the figures for 10 years ago, the failed Yasune ITT proposal in Ecuador, which would be only, so to speak, 850 million barrels of oil, which would be left underground. This would be over the 20 or 30 years of life of this kind of oil field, equivalent to half a year of the carbon dioxide produced in 1 year by Germany. So this is more or less equivalent to the Lofoten Islands. So it's not very much, but it's a little help, isn't it? And on its side, foregoing 50 million tons of liquefied natural gas in Cabo Delgado in Mozambique, this would be equivalent to 150 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. This is already quite a lot. This is like, say, compared to Spain, is more or less like, well, half the production of carbon dioxide of Spain, a little bit, 1/3, more or less. So it's noticeable. Now, going not from the mining of coal or the exploitation of oil or gas, going to the burning, we have seen that an efficient 1,000 megawatts coal-fired power plant will emit more or less these tons of carbon dioxide, 6 million or 6.5 million tons of carbon dioxide per year. So here we can also calculate what could happen. What could happen, and this is the last one, is that if we humans as a collective of people, or all the states in the world put together agreeing, we would say we're going to stop half the coal-fired power plants in the world today, we could make a real difference to the emissions. We could diminish the emissions by about 6 billion tons of carbon. From the 40 billion, we could diminish 6 billion. So it's not half, but it's what is 15%, isn't it? So one ballpark, as the Americans say, ballpark estimate of potential drop in emissions because of these local struggles could be like 10%, 15% of what is needed. What is needed is, of the 40 billion tons of carbon dioxide, we have to diminish very soon, about half. Well, about half of this half, or 1/4 of this half, could come from these bottom-up movements. And this is nothing invented. There's some reality about this when we see what has happened in the States with stopping the pipelines, what has happened in the Lofoten Islands, what has happened with Ende Gelände in Germany, perhaps, what has happened in Japan with stopping some coal-fired power plants and so on. So that's the end of the talk, and I am ready for questions. Perhaps I have wanted to explain too many things in one talk, but I hope this has been useful, especially because being recorded, you can listen to it again. Also, my accent is not exactly the accent to which you are used if you are listening to it from India, and I apologize for this, but I do my best.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Martinez-Alier. This was a wonderful lecture. Yes, I mean, it was detailed, but thank you for the details too, because we keep telling our students about, the need to watch out and learn from these, newly emerging non-state actors who are becoming a very, very powerful force in changing decision-making the world over. So this was very detailed, and thanks for that. So we'll take questions now. There are a few questions already on the chat box. I mean, in the chat box. Can I read out a few? Is that okay, Professor? So the first question is from
I'm going to fetch some water myself, if you don't mind.
Yeah, okay. So this is Professor T.J. Raman. If you, we just take more questions, then let Professor Martinez-Alier come back. Yeah, he's just going to get some water for himself. So, but please do ask questions. When there are very few questions in the chat box, I myself managed to type one, but please do. Okay, so Professor, so shall we read out the questions? Shall I read out a few? First,
would you repeat the question, Professor Barry?
Okay, so the first question is a question about asking you to comment on this. That you said that if the world emits on the scale of India, that is 2 tons per capita, then it will. So there's a request for a comment. Then the biosphere would absorb only, it would be 16 million tons, and the biosphere about 8, and oceans about 2 to 3, and then that's only about 11. So it's a question from Professor T.J. Raman, and he's asking for a comment or reply from you.
Yes. Shall I answer now, or shall I?
Yes. How would you like to take it? Would you like to take 2 questions? I think this is a standalone kind of question. There are.
Yeah, let's take 2 or 3. Yes.
Yeah. There's a question from Barbara also about technology and technological improvements, state-of-the-art technologies in specific sectors of mining and extraction, which could probably reduce or minimize wrecking soil water complexes. So that's a question that's come from Professor Barbara Harris, right? So there's a second question. So would you like to take these, Professor? Would you like to answer?
Yeah, on the first question, what I said is that the average for India, the emissions from India is 2 tons of CO2 per capita per year, isn't it? And that the world average is 5 tons. And that then I said that Japan, as I showed, is at the level of 10 tons. And the US at 20 tons. I mean, these are obviously very round figures. So, it's, and what I said is that if we go back to 100 years, because the increased greenhouse effect, the scientists know this more or less since 1896, when Arrhenius wrote one of the first articles explaining that burning coal in industrial countries would increase the concentration in the atmosphere, and that this would warm the temperature of the world. And he made some calculations of doubling the concentration or tripling the concentration that would have meant 900 parts per million. Let's hope that this never happens, isn't it? 600 would be terrible, but these are the calculations he made, which were quite accurate already. Now we know much more about the effects locally and in the tropics, in the equator, and so on. So my point was that with 2 tons per capita, of course, the population has increased, but on 7 billion people, the amount of carbon dioxide per year could be absorbed every year by the new vegetation and by the oceans without increasing the concentration in the atmosphere. These are very rough figures, but it's more or less true. It's more or less true that this, so of course, one can say, don't talk about India as a whole, because India, Mr. Adani is in India, as Indian as everybody else in India, and he is really much above the average in his emissions. But this is true. So this is anything you want to say. I think this answers the question, or at least if you want to come back, because I didn't listen to the question because I got up to get some water for me, so I missed the question.
That was the question. The question was about a comment on this, and well, at least it will.
But of course, India should not go to the meetings. I think you should go to the meetings as a country, as many other poor countries in the world, asking for the ecological debt, saying we are creditors of an ecological debt, and you have an environmental liability. But I don't think the problem is money. Is acknowledging the debt and saying we are going to do the reduction in the north, and in the south you don't have to do the reduction still. Yeah. The south does not include China. China has become a rich country in terms of coal.
So, Professor, the question that Professor Barbara Harris-White is asking is also related to the question from Sahil Matthew about the environmental Kuznets curve and what they told us from the environmental Kuznets curve, that is, they justify environmental degradation, saying someday you will grow and you will become clean, right? So,
yes.
Does that work? And Barbara's question is about, well, why can't we do?
I think it's, I think this is, I mean, Barbara Harris would agree that this is this idea that, well, first I disagree with the idea that the environmentalists are rich people, or as Engelhardt, who died recently actually, Engelhardt wrote that environmentalism was a post-materialist thing, because I thought this was so wrong, because the rich are not post-materialists. The rich, we have more material, we spend more materials and energy than the poor. This is quite obvious. So why call the rich post-material? He meant post-economic. The rich people were not so worried about having more money as the very poor, which I don't know whether it's true or not. But anyway, this idea that that the rich people think more about the environment than about the poor is totally wrong, because the poor people think a lot about the environment because they think about land, water, and air to breathe, isn't it? So if the air is polluted, they are thinking about the environment. If they have no land to cultivate, they think about the environment. And if the water is polluted, they think about the environment. So that's what Ram Gua, myself, and other people call the environmentalists of the poor. and goes against this idea of economists of the so-called environmental Kuznets curve, that the environment improves when a country becomes rich. But as so often, wrong things are half true, and the environmental Kuznets curve is half true. For instance, it is true, and this will happen soon in China, that atmospheric pollution in cities can be improved easily, as happened in London after 1952, in which people were dying in London of London smog, and smog was smoke and fog altogether, and the smoke was sulfur dioxide and particles from coal burning, either in houses or in coal-fired power plants. So after 52, pollution went down in London very quickly, partly because you were in London, they were importing nuclear power energy, or later gas, which I don't know, the nuclear power energy, whether it's a good idea. But at least you import it from far away. And the nuclear risk is not near the city. Anyway, so the air in London improved, and the air in Beijing is going to improve, or is already improving. The air in Delhi is still deteriorating, isn't it? And in Kanpur and in the whole valley of the Ganges in winter, because of burning straw, as people say, but at least a lot because of burning a lot of coal in cities. So here, the Kuznets curve, the environmental will apply, because it's relatively easy both to put filters in the power stations, well, it costs money, but you can do it, and to change the fuel from coal to gas, isn't it? This is very easy. And you improve the efficiency because of combined cycle gas power stations. And this is going to, I hope, to happen in northern India, because a lot of people are dying of this pollution. It also happened in the city of Delhi, isn't it? When you change from burning what were the cycles burning to gas, isn't it? From burning fuel oil to burning gas in a lot of the traffic, isn't it? But of course, the traffic has increased a lot, therefore, because people have become richer, and therefore the total pollution, I'm not sure, has decreased. So there was, well, Barbara Harry knows all this. So the question is that I don't think one can trust the environmental Kuznets curve to improve things, because for carbon dioxide, the richer the people, the more carbon dioxide, and the more, yeah.
So, Professor, there's a question here about the Environmental Justice Atlas and whether it covers China. Given the extent of commodity and energy consumption in China, how do you view politics around climate change in China? So it's a question from Nagraj.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, the atlas covers all the whole world, including China. We haven't got so many cases in the atlas from China as we should, because, well, anyway, we're trying to. Also, obviously, I'm not culturally, I'm not very good on China. I'm, of course, very interested, but I don't know China so well. But the others, there are at least 2 or 3 people entering cases from China. And one is particularly concerned with coal-fired power plants, of which there are many in China, and they are still increasing. And also talking about China, one has to talk about China in China and China outside China, with the Belt and Road investments. The Belt and Road investments, there are all kinds of investments. And well, I must say, as everybody else, I am impressed by China and by everything, the population policy, the political system, and the economic growth, and everything. and I would like to live 50 years longer just to know what is happening, what will happen with China. But the Belt and Road investments comprise a lot of coal-fired power plants in places like Indonesia and including Pakistan and southern Pakistan, the Thar deserts. The Thar desert, apart from all this history, has a lot of lignite coal, a lot of coal deposits. I don't know whether in the Indian part also, but at least the Pakistani part a lot. And this is going to be exploited, which is already being exploited for coal-fired power plants. This is financed by China and, well, could be financed by the World Bank. It's not that China is especially bad financing coal-fired power plants. But the question is that this is going to be a mess environmentally, local mess and a mess internationally. So it could be that China, inside China, becomes less, goes down a little bit the use of coal, which is 4 billion tons per year, is 4 times as much as China, as India. 4 billion is like 3 tons per capita in India per year, which is more or less like Britain or Belgium or Northern France before 1914, with a lot of pollution, and then of course went down with oil and gas. So 3 tons per year. Well, they could say yes, why not? But they are going to go down a little bit, but partly because it's difficult to mine all these coals. So what will happen with China, if this is the question, is that let's separate China in China and China outside China. Because China has such a surplus in the current account, economically, in money terms, that they have to invest outside, isn't it? China is learning to become, if I can say so, between commas, an imperialist country. They cannot avoid it, I think.
Yeah. There's one more question from Aditya Ramakrishnan. But
it's a question that you Indians are specialists in colonialism and imperialism. It's a case of flag follows trade.
Yeah.
It's a bit like first the East Indian Company and then the British Empire, assuming it was like this. So China is clearly like this. They are not imperialist in the political sense yet. Okay.
So may I ask you to just turn off this, stop the screen sharing so that we can see you on the screen better, and we can also take a couple of questions. Yeah, if we stop screen sharing, you will appear on the screen. So while you're doing that, the question from Aditya Ramakrishnan is about the alternatives to coal, which are damaging, and local communities who protest against that, for instance, the dam protests in India. So the question is, what are the options for action in such a scenario where fossil fuels and alternatives to energy generation can be ecologically damaging and unjust?
Yeah, well, it depends when. There are many local complaints. For instance, in India, it's clearly the case that there are many complaints which I would call rather the environmentalists of the poor, and the indigenous, or the subaltern, some people call this, depending on, or the dispossessed. There are many ways of saying the same thing. In places like Jharkhand, as already mentioned, Chhattisgarh, about coal mining, and the vocabulary is Adivasi rights or the Forest Rights Act, isn't it, against occupation of land by mining companies, public or private. Quite often is the coal, the national coal enterprise. And they, of course, if coal would be left in the underground, all this coal would not be burned, and there would be less carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This happens not only in India, it happens in other places. For instance, clearly in Shanxi, Mongolia, both South Mongolia, Northern Mongolia, which is an independent country in which there are complaints against coal mining, happens in Colombia, happens in Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, in Guaiba, which is next to Porto Alegre, where they want to open a very big coal mine. So there are lots of places in the world in which people are complaining against coal mine. Of course, I understand that the question is that there is also local compensation in terms of money and jobs and so on. But the pollution, health cannot be compensated with money, isn't it? Well, depending, but it's not, people can say that is not. And then in other cases, it's not the coal mining, it's rather coal burning in coal-fired power plants mainly, or in steel plants. But the steel plants is something which seems more unavoidable, isn't it? Although there are other technologies for steel, you can do steel with electricity only, without burning coal in blast furnaces. And I think there are still other ways of doing steel. And this is practice. This could become, isn't it? Imagine electricity from windmills for steel plants. Well, a lot of wind and a lot of windmills, but this could probably be done. But for electricity, this is the main use of coal nowadays, isn't it? And electricity, well, I think it's going, somebody has written here that this is going to continue. I agree. It's going to continue. We're discussing whether in the world in general, CO2 emissions are going to go down. To go down, technologies can change. The economy of the rich countries can go down, as it did last year with the pandemic, 10% or 20%, maintaining welfare as it is. I am a degrower for the rich countries. In the poorer countries, we see, well, population in the world will also will reach the top in 20 or 30 or 40 years, and then probably will go down a little bit. Why not? And also the other factor is these local movements, which are more or less effective.
That was actually one question from me.
Yeah. So that's,
sorry. I just wanted, since you mentioned local movements, I just wanted to bring in that was my question. So how do these local movements, so the LFFU local movements, emergence of non-state actors, what have you seen as a response of the governments of these? Because
well, it depends, I think, yeah. You mentioned that,
these non-state actors, yes.
Well, the case I follow myself because I was involved in it was the Yasune initiative in Ecuador. What happened, Ecuador is a very small country, small in size, and the population is, 20 million or so. And there is a good environmental movement since the 80s. And it so happened that the government changed in the 2007. Correa came in, an economist, and the Minister for Energy was an economist, Alberto Costa, who had become an ecological economist, a real card-carrying ecological economist before being a minister. And he knew a lot about the oil industry professionally. And he thought it was a very good idea because of the disasters in Ecuador from Chevron in the northern part of Amazonia in Ecuador, Chevron Texaco, since the 80s. People had seen that local disasters would be good to leave oil in the soil in the Yasune, these 850 million barrels. So I was involved in this, and at the end it failed because Correa is a more normal economist. He's an anti-ecological economist, a mainstream economist, and he thought this was too generous for humanity and that Ecuador would not do this unless they compensated Ecuador with money. And at the end, this is being exploited now by Chinese companies, actually, the Yasune field. And also not everybody was in favor of this in Ecuador. Of course, there was different opinions. There was a proposal for a referendum, and this was not accepted. I think the people would have voted in favor of keeping oil in the soil in the referendum. This would have meant that Ecuador would have been a leader, world leader from the south. Already in 2009 in Copenhagen, could have been like this, in the world from the south, saying, you rich people, you have been producing carbon dioxide and we are going to teach you a lesson. This did not happen. So who the leaders in the world are in the carbon dioxide issue and the global warming issue, well, I think now this has passed to other people. I think, well, to the young generation of Fridays for Future, for instance, this is a new actor. Young people, young girls, mostly, I think, in northern countries, but not only northern countries, also in India and other countries in the south, who are saying, we are representing the new generations. So it's not only a question of south and north and so on, it's a question of we, the old people, and then the young people and the next generations. So I think there is a new actor, and this is something that governments obviously have difficulties in coping, isn't it, with young girls going to strikes, school strikes and demonstrating. It's not like going to Jharkhand or Chhattisgarh against Adivasi people complaining against killing some people who complain against coal mining, isn't it? A combination of both kind of movements would be very good.
Here again, a combination demands, like you said, a sensitive ecological economist as a minister. We don't get that, yeah. So it's not easy. A combination of this demands a leadership within the state, within the government that is.
Yeah, I was talking about Ecuador because I think that governments, I'm not against governments taking these initiatives. I'm not. I am very skeptical about this because we saw in Latin America, the left in Latin America with Correa in Ecuador or Evo Morales in Bolivia, at the end saying we are not going to become the leaders in the world, although some ministers were ready to do this, like Acosta, Maria Fernanda Espinosa, Pablo. I know them personally. Van der Falcone in Copenhagen is an old student of mine, and he was the Minister of External Affairs. And if you read his speech in Copenhagen in 2009, was trying to be a leader from the South. But of course, his president was undermining him. And why? Well, this would be like a Freudian politics. I don't know how to explain why. Well, more or less I joke that Correa was an anti-ecological economist, but this is more a joke than an explanation, isn't it? They thought that poverty was more important than the environment, instead of thinking that in the long run, exporting cheap oil or cheap materials as Latin America is doing is not a very good idea.
So, Professor Desta, thank you, Professor Desta. There's another question from Sagar Dhara, which is also tying into a question from Beda Prakash, saying that the compulsions of reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and that will remain. So, So, well, if climatic justice calls for permitting developing countries to emit, and they are kind of irreconcilable, as we say it from your lecture too, within the framework of the existence of nation states and the national, well, chest beating kind of chest thumping, declarations of growth and so on. Yeah? So how are we going to reconcile that? That is the nation state and paradigms of economic growth, which seem to be harmful for global well-being. Yeah. So he says that, do you feel that to solve these problems, we need to eschew national boundaries, economic growth, and the concept of private ownership of nature? So how do we do these things? And Beda's question is about redistribution of technological capacities and access to these in the developing countries. So if we are to grow again.
Yeah, it was interesting to say that. Well, I think it's perhaps too big a question, because when people would say, which I don't share totally, that the logic of the capitalist system is to grow, and it doesn't matter. Well, then you have what capitalist means. Is China a capitalist country? Well, they officially say, well, the Communist Party says that they are socialist, with Chinese characteristics, which nobody knows. Well, I don't know exactly what it means, but they are not neoliberal, clearly. I don't believe that neoliberalism explains anymore a lot. Although, of course, India is going through a neoliberal phase with Indian characteristics, isn't it? With a state which is very powerful politically, I think, but I don't know. So this is interesting to discuss, but I'm not an expert more than anybody else in the audience. But what I think that the question is whether states allow these grassroots movements to have any saying. And quite often they suppress them or they repress them, not because of what they say, but because of what they do. So if there is a movement in a place, even could be in Japan, or could be in Taiwan, or could be in Indonesia, or could be in India, which manages to stop a coal-fired power plant, the government, the state, the first thing they will do is to send the police and try to make the people quiet. An example in India, which I know a little bit secondhand, well, I've been there myself, is in Sompeta in Andhra Pradesh. As I've been there as an eco-tourist just for a few hours. So I don't know, I have no real idea about what happened. I don't speak Telugu, I don't know. But what apparently happened is that they were going to build some very big coal-fired power plants in the region of Sompeta, which is northern Andhra Pradesh, very near Odisha. And the people complained because it's a wetland. They were using the wetland for rice growing, for pastures for the animals. They complained and the police killed. This was about 10 years ago. The police killed, this was before Modi, I think. They killed 10 people, 7 people, 6 people. In fact, I've been there, as it happens in India. When the police kill somebody, people build monuments, little monuments, which will be good for historians. And I know, I've seen the monument. I have a picture of myself with this monument somewhere, and people who came with us. So this is Sompeta. The local people didn't care at all, and why should they have cared about climate change 10 or 15 years ago? Perhaps now they have heard about it. They were complaining against coal-fired power plant because of local reasons. Not the pollution, just because of the land grabbing that was going on. The land grabbing by some private firms. So this is what I mean about that one should, well, local movements have to work, I wouldn't say with the government, they should act despite the governments and trying to neutralize the governments and to stop the governments or to divide the governments. And because not all governments are so repressive, isn't it? So that's the question. Yeah, these are interesting political questions which have to do what we mean by the state, whether the state is a unique body or whether the state is so divided internally that people can use parts of the state to promote their own causes, isn't it? But the state in general has been proven that they are not very much in favor of stopping climate change, because they have had, the first meeting was in '92 in Rio de Janeiro, isn't it? And they signed a treaty. They have done nothing, literally nothing, for 30 years. And they could have known 100 years before. They knew, the scientists knew 100 years before. And they did nothing for 90 years, from 96 to 86, when the IPCC was formed. The scientists have done lots of things. The scientists have behaved well, I think, as scientists, doing all these IPCC reports. The states, whether of all kinds, have done nothing.
So yes, I mean, your talk did does seem to end.
So
with,
just to finish the answer, the states have done
Yes.
nothing. Why? Because they are sort of, well, as Marx said, governments are just the committee of the bourgeoisie or something like this, Marx wrote. So the states are capitalist, neoliberal capitalist, or Keynesian social democratic capitalist, or the states like to be states. Power explains itself. You don't have to explain power. You don't need to explain the economy, which is more a sort of anarchist position, I suppose. Power is explained by itself, by power, isn't it? Or a feminist position. You don't have to find any other reason for it. And therefore, powerful states tend to expansion, military expansion, economic expansion, and so on. And so they need a lot of energy, physical energy. And this has come from fossil fuels or nuclear, which is worse, isn't it, in a way? So that's why one should not trust states. Well, empirically, states up to now have done nothing about climate change, apart from meeting every 2 or 3 years, and we'll see next time in Glasgow, isn't it? And the Paris Agreement are voluntary agreement and exclude liability explicitly. Says this agreement does not imply, even Bhagwati, the neoliberal Indian economist in New York, complained in an article in the Financial Times. And he said, no, we should apply strict liability, which is even if something unintended, is you are liable for damage that you have done.
So I mean, I'm just going to well say thank you to you and wind up this. It's been 2 hours now, and it's been a very, very interesting lecture and very interesting questions and answers to them too. For us, the takeaway message for us, I think, is most importantly this, that the emergence of these non-state actors, the LFFU movements, are perhaps the most promising, well, emergence that we can see and hopefully work with to address climate change questions, given that the nation states don't seem to be doing very much. As Professor Martinez-Alier, you concluded by saying that states have done practically nothing, that they've known for 100 years and have done nothing. So it's probably going to be, well, more and more, we'll probably see more and more answers coming from these local LFFU movements and other local resistance movements too.
Well, I think that, well, if we would have to, because this is something, a lecture that you have organized so well, I think it's the 24th lecture for teachers, any kind of teachers. I think the main thing I can leave with you is the killing curve, which of course I didn't do it myself. The killing curve is an effort by scientists and by in San Diego, in California, so it's scientists, it's not even the US state, that it must not be very expensive to set up an observatory so that people would agree to measure the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. This could have been in anywhere in Uttarakhand, for instance, in any mountain without traffic, isn't it? And it has been done in many places to measure. But this curve, killing curve, is not so often. I don't know whether one could like now do a test with Indian newspapers and say which Indian newspapers have published the killing curve in the next 60 years, which is when it started, or before, 70 years, to be as a public thing. The Hindu or the Times of India or any of the, probably not very many. And there is too much discussion, I think, about 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees or 3 degrees because of the uncertainty. We don't know. Because of the geography, we don't know. The effects, we don't know exactly, although we know enough that we know that Mumbai will have a problem with sea level rising, and also Barcelona and so on, and so on. We know it's going to be bad, but it's better to look at the carbon side. This curve has to be flattened, as we all have learned about pandemics curves by now, that need to be flattened, isn't it? And the population curve also needs to be flattened. Flatten doesn't mean to go down 100%, flatten. And therefore, this is the main point of the lecture. The second point is how this is going to be achieved. And I said a mixture of technological changes, windmills, so on, lithium batteries, sodium batteries, the electrical revolution, okay, which is going to mean a lot of extra mining also in many places. Also, population, stopping the population. Also decreasing the economy in the rich countries. And fourth, well, some policies like carbon taxes. And fifth, which is my modest contribution to the discussion, to listen to these local movements. And in fact, when I say I want to calculate the CO2, I am late for this already, and I don't mind at all that I'm late, because the indigenous movements in Canada already came with a figure of 25% that they have achieved themselves, isn't it? And people in Japan got a price and also a quantitative estimate of what they had achieved and in the last few months. So this is going to become, I think, very much a discussion about where these bottom-up movements are helping to put it like this, the states, or teaching a lesson to the states on what should be done.
Okay, yeah. No, thank you very much. No, yes, it is a major lesson coming from the local movements for all of us, for the state in particular. Yeah. So I'm just going to conclude now. Nagraj, shall we conclude and say, yeah. Okay, thank you very much, Professor Martinez-Alier. This has been a wonderful lecture.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. You can imagine.
Thank you. And I also thank all the participants for all your questions, and also some of you like Barry Gills and others who had comments. I mean, thank you very much for your comments too. They've been very rich, and we will have this recording up on our TACC webpage. So please feel free to download or watch whenever you feel like. Yeah. Thank you.